The devil is in the detail. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast of The Ordinary Maverick. This is Ajay, your host, an ordinary maverick, sharing real life thoughts and experiences and maverick tips. If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, please do so, and you will not miss another episode. It's a beautiful day up here in the mountains in Duval, Washington. The sun is out, the snow is melting as droplets from very tall red cedars. With the sun rays coming through, the droplets look like pearls falling off. What a sight to behold and cherish with my morning cup of coffee. Most people like me start their mornings with a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of milk. Now, what's common here? It's the milk. Of course, many have their coffee black too, and that's perfectly fine. But if you do take milk, then let me start with a question. Is it A1 or A2? Now, if you're like me, you would wonder, what's this? Sounds like a maths formula. And what does it have to do with milk? Well, fellow mavericks, here's the thing. You have A1 type of milk and A2 type of milk. Regular milk contains both A1 and A2 beta casein, the milk protein. But the A2 milk contains only A2 beta casein. Now, why does that matter? Well, when A1 protein is taken inside the body, it breaks down into a molecule that has been preliminarily linked to cardiovascular and autoimmune diseases. And the A2 milk protein is digested in a way that may have beneficial effects. Isn't this interesting? Milk basically has two primary proteins, casein and whey. And casein is about 80% of the protein. Now, both A1 and A2 are variants of a type of casein protein called beta casein, which is about 30% of the protein in milk. Now, some breeds of cows produce A1 milk, whilst others A2. Human milk, sheep, goat, donkeys, camel, buffalo, and sheep are all A2. Due to the rising awareness of these types, some breeders only offer milk with A2 proteins. The milk as well as the DNA of the cows are tested to make sure that they conform to the A2 protein delivery. In some countries, the milk is labeled as A2 very clearly and sold as such. Believe me, this is a detail that we all need to be aware of, right? I mean, it's something we consume and our families and our children do too. So we should know what's going in our bodies. We discovered more on this recently and are fortunate to be able to get fresh A2 milk from a farm nearby. Believe me, it's the most delicious milk we have had in a long time. One can literally taste the difference. Now, here's where the thinking on the devil is in the detail or details matter comes in. Yes, details are important, and in the case of the milk protein can affect quality of your life as well as lead to long-term issues. We often say, oh, it doesn't matter, or where is the time to know all the details? But the more I deliberate on this, I do feel that it's a case by case issue. Yes, for some things, details do matter, while for some, it may not be that important. Let me share a story from our family archives, one that is told with a lot of laughter and smiles. My father-in-law shares the story of the never-ending cooking of the rice kheer, or in other words, the rice pudding. Many decades back, during one of his job postings overseas, he, along with a few friends, decided they wanted to eat the Indian rice kheer as dessert. They were all forced bachelors at the time, as everyone's wives were back home. None of them had made this before, but were confident that they've seen it so many times and it looked super easy. All that had to be done was cook together the rice and milk along with sugar over the flame, and after some time, the kheer will be ready. And that's exactly what they did. No details, you see. Well, perhaps you can guess what happened. The rice cooked, the milk was less. And they had to run and get more milk and add that in. And that was less too. They finished all the milk in the house and still it was less. As the story goes, they were adding milk for the next several days and the kheer kept taking in more and more and more. They ended up eating the kheer for weeks. Can you imagine? All because there was no attention to details in terms of the measurement or proportion of rice and the milk and sugar that needs to be added to create that perfect pudding. So here is where the details matter. Of course, there's no harm done per se, as it's after all linked to cooking a dish, and if it goes wrong, one can always remedy it. But sometimes the details can matter even more. Like when we traveled with our dogs cross country, some details like the paperwork that was needed, the various clearances, and the timing for these. No one tells you this all at once, and the information is also not readily available. Yes, there are folks that support pet travel, but many times these are not able to help in certain countries, or as the information changes, they are also not updated. We experienced this when our dogs traveled with us from Nigeria to Bangladesh. It was in the COVID pandemic times, so that was another challenge. We tried to find out as many details as possible, but still, when we arrived in Dhaka, we realized that our dogs couldn't be released from the airport cargo area as the gates opened only after 9 am. Seemingly a small detail, but it did give us some stress. We arrived early in the morning around 5 am after traveling for nearly 36 hours and were sure that it must have been super difficult for the dogs too, taking this long flight and then the layover. And then to have to wait an additional 5 hours needlessly. Just waiting for the gates to open was just so frustrating and pointless. We were anxious to know how our dogs were doing and no one seemed to be able to tell us anything. Luckily, we had a friend who knew the animal quarantine officer who went in and told us the dogs were okay. But he couldn't do anything to release them, even though he was there and had the authority as he was waiting for the papers, which could only be brought in when the gates opened. So our poor dogs had to just sit there waiting, no food or water, no pee and poo, and only got home almost 7 hours after landing. An additional time period that added up close to 42 hours of travel. They were exhausted, and when we finally did meet them, they were not looking good at all. It took them both several days to recover, and while we know travel is not easy for them, the additional wait time must have been even more taxing. That was a detail we were unaware of, and this is what happens when info is sprung up on you and you just have to deal with it. It leads to a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety that could perhaps have been avoided. That experience taught us something though. So for the next 2 travels that our dogs would do, from Bangladesh to India and then from India to the US, we went in deep with the details. So much so that we landed up knowing more about these travel journeys for the pets than the so-called professionals. We were telling them what was needed and anticipating ahead on all the requirements, double checking and preparing accordingly. But those travels went absolutely smoothly and our dogs took the journeys very well, for which we are extremely grateful. Definitely the details mattered in this case, and today our dogs are happy and enjoying being with us, having traveled across continents and countries. In fact, now we feel comfortable sharing the details with other pet parents, and recently we did exactly that with a friend's cousin who was bringing their dog overseas. Small details that no one had alerted them were shared and their dog traveled well. The happiness that we got seeing the happy pictures when their dog reached safely is indescribable. I'm sure there are several such instances where details do matter. Like when we lived in South Africa and the art of lighting a fire for braaiing. Yes, a braai is a South African tradition and super fun. It's a barbecue, but having lived there and experienced many braai gatherings, I can say it with confidence. It's not just another barbecue. There's a whole art and science to hosting a braai, and we absolutely loved it. But here again, the details mattered if you want to get it right. And the braai master was the one who had mastered these details and created the perfect braai. From lighting the fire to cooking the meat. Just right, tender, juicy, fully cooked. I have to say though, being a vegetarian, I haven't tasted the meat, But from what everyone tells me, the way it's done in South Africa, it is just perfect. Of course, I was a braai master for vegetarian braai. In all the gatherings, my veggie braai was a big hit. So much so that everyone wanted a taste of the veggies, and having learned from experience, I would make extra to cater for this. In the initial few times, made only a little and found that everyone wanted it. Typically, meat lovers don't go for veggie stuff, but in the braai case, it was different. Again, details did matter. The veggies were perfectly cooked on the braai to not lose their flavor. Let me end by sharing another fun example of details. It's when one gives directions to places. Here is where details matter, or you'll never find what you're looking for. Well, I have shared this before. We are a foodie family. Love trying out new places and cuisines. One of our all-time favorites is the Indian chaat. That is a tangy, savory, sweet set of dishes that are snacky and popular all over India. In fact, every region has their own take on the chaat with different chutneys or sauces and flavors to give you that uniqueness. We will always remember our encounter with the hole in the wall pani puri. Yes, you heard it right, hole in the wall. When we first heard of it, we wondered what it was and were intrigued enough to follow the details to get there. It was exactly that, literally a hole in the wall. One could miss it if you didn't know and went looking for it. And from this hole, a man sat dispensing the most yummy pani puris. Pani puri is basically a bite-sized, round empty shell made of wheat or refined flour. You pop it open gently and then fill it with a lot of tangy stuff and flavored water. Once ready, you pop it in your mouth at one go. That's the trick. It has to be all in one swift action. The flavors that hit you transport you to another dimension. My mouth is already watering, and it took me few takes to record this part of the podcast. This was in Delhi, the capital city of India, and we undertook a foodie tour in the olden part of Delhi some years back. Followed all the detailed instructions and discovered the most amazing food. Fellow Mavericks, yes, details matter for sure. Life is beautiful and fun in its experience of these small things. But the converse is also true. Often, details don't matter. And that, my friend, is the crux. Knowing when and which details matter makes all the difference. We will discuss the flip side of details don't matter some other time. For now, do keep writing your comments and sharing your feedback via our Instagram at The Ordinary Maverick or through our hashtag The Ordinary Maverick. I love hearing from you. This is Ajay signing off and wishing you have an amazing day, a super amazing year. Keep well, stay safe. Credits. This podcast series was put together as a team effort from the Bhardwaj family. Concept, design, title, researchers and reviewers Ajay, Sanjana, Avantika and Niharika Bhardwaj. Script, Sanjana. Cover design, Niharika. All rights reserved.